YouTube, commercials, documentaries, content, weddings. There are so many different types of video editing. Choose wrong and you'll spend the rest of your life hating every moment that you work. Get it right and you'll look forward to waking up and cutting. But which one should you choose? And how do you make the right decision? In this episode, you'll learn what the different types of video editing are and the pros and cons of each so that you can pick the right one. Hello Splicers, welcome to the video editing podcast from Unsplice. On this show, you'll hear industry secrets and practical tips to help video editors and teams create better commercials, reels, and documentaries faster so that you can earn more money from the same amount of work. This is the second episode in a series helping you launch your freelance video editing career. Now, each episode is going to bring you one lesson from the curriculum of Unsplice Pro. Unsplice Pro, if you didn't know, is a step-by-step group mentorship program that helps you earn your first £300 day as a freelance commercial or documentary editor. And it helps walk you through how to build a consistent income in less than a year. To learn more about Unsplice Pro, head to unsplice.com/pro. The purpose of this episode is to help you avoid a life of misery. And I've spoken to a lot of miserable video editors over the years, and all of them feel stuck cutting stuff that they just don't enjoy. At one point in their career, they said yes to a job because they just needed the money. Now, fast forward several years, they hate their job that they used to love. They're not editing anything that they actually like, all because they said yes to the wrong thing. So how do you know what to say no to so that you can avoid a lifetime of misery? So let's talk about the different types of video editing. Let's break down the categories, then we'll talk about the skills, the pros and cons, and how they kind of cross over. The different types of video editing are scripted, reality TV, documentaries, commercials, branded content, online content, weddings, broadcast, trailers, music videos, corporate, and events. So within each of these categories, we can have genres like sports. You might have a sports documentary or a sports TV broadcast, or you might have sports online content. So even though they're sports, from a client's perspective, they all carry with them different skill sets. It would be difficult from a client's perspective to convince someone who's only ever cut online content for sports to be of a high enough skill level to be able to cut broadcast live footage. And from an editor's perspective, the storytelling skills needed, there's a lot of overlap there. There might be a difference in workflow. So for example, on online content, it's all self-contained. You might be the only person that works on it from beginning to end. Whereas for broadcast, you would be an offline editor, and then that would have to go out for color grade, sound mix, VFX, motion graphics, etc., and then all come back together for the online. But if you're working only in sports, it might actually be easy to kind of move from one to the next later on in your career. With the online content group, that is YouTube content, social media content, even though they are very different in terms of cutting a YouTube video and cutting stuff for social content, from a client's perspective, they might see that as the same thing. I would put a wider gap between YouTube and social media content, just cutting social media reels. But depends if you're working directly with a YouTube creator or not, or if you're working with a brand, because from a brand's perspective, they might see an editor who cuts YouTube will be fine to cut some social media stuff. But if you're working with a YouTube creator, then they're going to look for somebody specifically with YouTube experience and not social media experience. So there's a bit of a gray area there with online content, but I'm telling you how these different clients have these different perspectives of the skill sets needed for each. Okay, so now you know how it's all grouped together and what they are. Let's talk about the pros and cons of each. With scripted, it's a lot harder to get into, but it is the most glamorous. Most people will watch films and movies and be drawn in by the glamour of being able to work on these Hollywood level films. It does require a long trajectory of career growth. You will find yourself doing junior and assistant editor work for years. Pay can be pretty good, especially if you're working within Hollywood or London or New York. So those are the kind of three hubs with the most paid editors. And if you want to get into that, then there is a kind of set route. You're going to start off as an assistant. You have to apply or network to find some assistant roles and then work your way up. Be an editor on a low or no paid job, and then gradually build up those credits and get more and more experience working with longer form scripted content. It's very much about networking to work in scripted. So take that into consideration. What are the pros? Are recognition. You get to say to your friends, I cut that, when they go to the cinema or when they're watching something on Netflix, but it's going to take you a long, long time to get there. So that's a con. Pros, good money. If you are working in the upper tiers, you can demand good money. You might work on 1 or maybe 2 projects a year. So you have a generous amount of time off in between jobs. If you're working in the US and you're part of the union, you get some pretty good benefits from that. But the cons are a very, very long career growth and not a lot of money at the beginning. You're going to have to do a lot of scraping, a lot of working double jobs and networking hard. It's going to be a grind. The reality TV scene can be, as an editor, pretty monotonous because you are cutting the same thing constantly. But as a pro, there's a lot of longevity there from a career perspective. You can work as a freelancer and you're essentially working, as long as they like you, for as long as that series continues. Let's say Love Island in the UK, Keeping Up with the Kardashians as well. These reality TV shows, they go on and on if they're really, really successful. So if you're the go-to editor for those shows, then you have a very long, lustrous career, security as well, and you make bank. Because if you're charging freelance rates and you're working the entire year, most other freelancers, there's a lot more time off. There's no overlap between those jobs. It's good. There's good and bad there. And from my opinion, from speaking to reality TV editors, they love it as a way to kind of get in. You can work your way up as an assistant and then work your way up as a story editor and then move into editor. There's a lot of satisfaction there at the beginning because you can kind of move fairly quickly. But once you get there, once you're editing, it can be quite monotonous because you're just doing the same thing constantly. You're working with the same people. You're watching the same footage, pretty grinding after a while. I've heard a lot of reality TV editors will start their career in reality and then they'll kind of do a pivot and move over to something else. Documentaries or scripted, you can choose between those. Moving on to documentaries. Documentaries are one of the hardest, in mine and the industry's opinion, one of the hardest types of editing to master because you're essentially creating a story from scratch. You've got absolutely everything in front of you and you kind of have to figure it all out. That's why it's one of the hardest edits to master. But in my opinion, the most rewarding for the very same reason. You get to craft the story. There's so many different levels of storytelling to know, to understand, to learn. And it feels like you're constantly learning. Even now, 15 years I've been editing. The pay rates are not as good as scripted. It is a slightly lower rate. They kind of say, well, the industry, the clients, they say, well, we're going to book you in for 8 weeks for this. You know, a 20-minute documentary, you can maybe get 5 or 6 weeks of work booked. It used to be a lot longer. It's not anymore. Now you're looking at 5 to 8 weeks for a documentary edit of 20 to 30 minutes, unless you're going to be working on some streaming platforms, documentaries, in which case you're going to get a lot longer. You're going to get a few months. There's a lot more red tape there, legal red tape for them to go through. So iterations on the archive and things like that. So generally speaking, the rates for documentaries are a bit lower, but you get booked for a longer duration. And so the client says that's why they're going to pay you less. It's difficult for documentary jobs to line up. So let's say you're working for 2 months. During that period, you're going to get somebody else reach out to you and say, hey, can you work on this project? And if there's an overlap, then you have to say no. So it's difficult to work back to back with documentary edits. So you'll find yourself with gaps in between jobs, sometimes large gaps. And so you'll find that you'll have to work on other stuff in order to make ends meet. The stress levels with documentaries, they kind of start a couple of weeks to just watch the footage, absorb everything, get it in your head, organize the footage, create a first draft. and it gets progressively more and more stressful towards the deadline. And then for the last 2 weeks, it's hell because you've got so many things that need to happen, not enough time to do them. The hours are long. A standard documentary editing day is 10 hours, and anything over that can be charged overtime. In terms of working remotely, quite a lot of production companies have a system in place where all of the assets live on a server, and then you can kind of remote in to cut the documentary. But then there's a lot of directors who are still a bit old school and love to work side by side. So it's kind of like 50-50, I would say, that you are asked to come into an office or work side by side with a director. And that could even be in your home. So that is something to take into consideration if you're looking for a 100% completely remote situation. Then commercials. The format's shorter, 20, 30 seconds, could be up to 2 minutes. So you're looking at 2-week turnaround for these edits. Now I like these because whereas with documentaries, the stress is strung out over 6 weeks, the commercials stress is a lot shorter. It's a week of stress. It kind of gives you some moments to breathe in between jobs. The pay rate is the highest with commercials because there's a lot more money there. The way commercials editing works as a career, you would generally start cutting reels, doing low-paid stuff. Maybe you'd take an in-house agency job or work freelance in-house at an ad agency, PR agency, media agency, that sort of thing. You'd gradually work your way up until you work on bigger and better films, networking with directors and creators, creative directors, to work on better and better stuff. That's one way. Alternatively, you could work in-house at an edit studio and assistant editor, then junior editor, and work your way up. You are going to get paid less because you're going to be full-time, but you'll have more opportunity to work on some pretty damn cool things. Then, once you're at the top of your game, and if the edit agency isn't nurturing you as a talent, then you can go freelance and you've built all these contacts. You've got directors that you're working with, production companies, agencies. Is it remote? It is if you work freelance. It isn't if you work in-house at a post-production studio. Although some of those editing agencies do have remote setups, you will need to start at the bottom of the ladder in their building. So you'll have to be local. Branded content. If you're not sure what branded content is, it's not about a brand's product, but it's about a brand's values. Similar route to commercials. You're going to start freelancing. You're going to work on some reels. You're going to work with agencies, work your way up, longer and longer edits, better and better footage. Hours are pretty decent. You're going to be working pretty much 9 to 5 office hours. You're going to be earning a good wage, more than documentaries, less than commercials. It's kind of sitting in that midpoint. You will find PR agencies, media agencies, post-production agencies, ad agencies. These are all people creating branded content. You'll want to befriend producers from these kind of places. Is it stressful? It's not as stressful as commercials. It's less stressful. You'll probably want After Effects knowledge, motion graphics, that sort of thing. It's going to help you to sell yourself as a sort of a one-person band, and that is going to feed back into your rate. So if you don't have those, then you're not going to be able to charge as much as if somebody who can do motion graphics. If you're right at the beginning of the journey, don't worry about that yet. Get your editing down, then start working on your motion graphics. Weddings, they can be fun. I've heard a lot of people say having footage of people having the best day of their entire lives really fills them with joy every single day they work on these edits. They can be a really nice way to earn your living. The problems with weddings is the people that you work with can be really hit and miss with wedding videographers. Sometimes they can be pretty power hungry, who don't enjoy what they do and they just do it for the money. And sometimes you can find videographers who love what they do. So from that perspective, it's kind of 50-50 whether it's going to be stressful or not. You're looking at about 1 week for a wedding video. Rates generally tend to be buyouts. So they'll say, hey, can you cut this? We're going to give you $1,000 or whatever. The more you do, the quicker you're going to get. You'll have to reach out to the wedding videographers yourselves. So you'll have a bit of networking there to do. In terms of the hours, generally you can work when you want. They'll say, hey, we need this done by Friday. Okay, cool. So if you want to work at night and you want to go swimming in the sea, on the beach or sunbathe during the day, you can do that as long as you get the work done. So there's a lot more freedom there. It's going to be fully remote, but you may have a problem with the actual data transfer. So if the wedding videographer wants to send you a hard drive because they've got 2 terabytes of data for you to work with, then you're going to be a problem if you're in Barbados on the beach Internet connections can be pretty good. So if that is the case, if you're working like that, then you can say, yeah, no, it's fine, just upload it. The thing is, your download speed can be good, but if they've got terrible upload speed, then they're not going to want to do it. So take that into consideration when you are choosing who to work with. Is it stressful? Not really. It's a pretty sweet gig, but the rates are not great. Can you make a living? Yes, you can, but you want to be pretty booked up. With broadcast, you'll typically have people that you're going to be working directly with, directors, producers of the show, cutting to fairly tight deadlines. Of course, you can work in-house, a full-time position rather than freelance. There are freelance versions. Quite often, if you work your way up from full-time, you can say, hey, I'm going to go freelance, but then they just continue to employ you, except freelance. So your permalance is the industry term. So that's one side, very stable, interesting, maybe a little bit boring, maybe not. And then you've got the other side of broadcast, which is work from home, fully remote. For example, the indie scene, indie stuff for broadcast. For example, I've got some stuff for the BBC, and they were all done by indie post-production companies. They reached out and said, hey, we got this. Then they'll send you a hard drive and do it all from home. Sometimes the director will come sit with you. You won't be able to work on some remote beach, some remote island in the sun if you want to work on broadcast, but you can work from home. And there are these shows for independent production companies that you can get on board with. In order to work your way up to that, just network pretty hard. You want to start cutting some documentaries and music videos and commercials, etc., for you to practice editing with and put it in your portfolio. Build your portfolio so that it's working on documentary style stuff, and then you can move into broadcast. Is it stressful? It can be, but only towards the end. You've got many layers generally of people giving feedback, from the director to the producer, and then further up the hierarchy. They all want an opinion to make sure that everything fits with the style of the show and the company making it, the distributor. How's the money? The money is pretty good, about the same as documentaries, a little bit higher. You can make a good living from that. You might be on a project for 2 to 3 months, and then you'll see a big gap between those. So you can fill that with some other stuff, documentaries perhaps, or even commercials or reels. Then you got trailers. Trailers are very much a specific skill set. You have trailer companies specialize in cutting trailers, whether that's for feature films or TV series. They are normally in-house. It'll be all self-contained. You'll be a full-timer cutting these trailers. How's the salary? Pretty good. Not amazing, but pretty good. And at least you get some stability there. Trailers can be really fun because they're very short. If you're working on feature films, really high-level stuff, then they're going to spend a little bit longer on those. Quite often what they do now is they'll test trailers and then switch it up. So there's a lot of iteration. Can be a little laborious in that sense. Is it stressful? Kinda. Like most editing jobs, tight deadlines. But it's quite rewarding when you see your work out there and you can kind of point your friends and family towards it. Music videos are fun, but they don't pay. They don't pay much at all. In fact, hardly anything. The best music videos are all cut inside editing agencies because they have the best editors. They don't have the best budgets. And generally speaking, these production companies who are making these music videos will go to these edit houses and say, hey, remember that commercial that we brought you and you earned hundreds of thousands of pounds? We've got this music video which we're going to need you to cut for like £10. Will you do it? And they'll say, yeah, because they want to keep the production company sweet. Even though they're going to cut it for a loss, they say yes, because they know that they're going to bring in a commercial in the future. So if you're on the freelance side of that, it's like, hey, will you cut this music video for £10? Okay, I guess I will, because I need it for my portfolio, to build up my portfolio. But the thing is, if you fill your portfolio with just music videos, then you're only going to get music videos, and there's no money in music videos. So you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot there. But yes, they are fun to cut, a lot of fun. You know, the brief is open. You can go wild creatively with a music video. And so I find they're nice to kind of pepper in every now and again into your schedule when you've got some free time. But it's dangerous to build a career strictly towards music videos because you're going to be poor. Keep that in mind. Is it stressful? Depends on the client. How are the timelines? Typically 2 weeks, 4 weeks on, if they say, just get it back to us when it's done. Maybe that case they'll be like, those are the £10 jobs. They are fun, but there's no money. Corporate has this devilish reputation for being pretty evil, but it's actually a great way to make a lot of money. The videos are very, very easy, normally interview-led. Throw on some B-roll, some music, and make it entertaining as you can within the brand guidelines, which are pretty plain. You can just charge good money, commercial rates. The projects may be a week long for each one, but then you might get something else off of the back of that. So you might say, hey, we've got this corporate event happened, or we interviewed this CEO, we need you to cut this long film and then some social media cut downs from that. And so that 1 week edit might turn into 2. Is it stressful? No, you can work 9 to 5 hours. There's not much creativity though. If you're looking for something with max creativity, you really love the creative side, then do these sparingly. But if you just want to edit and you just want to make money, corporate's actually a really good way to do that. You can work in-house and earn some good money, but the best money is going to be when you're freelance, and you just need to speak to PR agencies really to find all that sweet, sweet corporate work. It can be remote. The footage they're going to send over might be heavy and they might need to send you a drive. That is a consideration. You might have to just let the client know beforehand. But there is a lot of easy money to be made from corporate. And event films are fun, but not in the same way like commercials are fun. You kind of throwing their reels, their hype reels, and I would kind of throw reels into the same genre, if you will. You're going to be speaking with PR agencies, you're going to be dealing with agencies, and perhaps even direct with companies themselves. A lot of this stuff is going in-house as well. So if they have an overspill, then being the freelancer on hand to do that is going to work in your favor. And they're not that stressful. Turnaround is normally in about 1 week to 2 weeks, and you can make a good living by cutting event films. Is it exciting? No, you're not going to be going down to the pub and telling all your friends this incredible job you're working on. But is it boring? No. So it's a very middle of the road. If you just want something stable, good, nice, then there you go. And the thing is with events, with the exception of COVID, you are nearly always going to have some kind of event going on. With marketing budgets, when marketing budgets get slashed, generally it's commercials that get hit the hardest. With corporate and events, there's still stuff happening because the companies, the corporations know that their biggest clients are other corporations. And so they need to create these videos to post on LinkedIn to show to the other corporations, hey, we want your business, look how good we are. And so it doesn't get hit quite as hard. With those categories of editing, you have to make sure when you set out on your journey as a freelance video editor that you choose wisely. Make sure you build a portfolio and you project towards the work that suits the lifestyle that you want to live. Because switching careers later on can be really, really difficult. But how do you figure that out? How do you know how to try all of the different types of editing and figure out which one is the best for you? Well, you need to find some footage to practice with, because if you wait long and try to get a booked job from each of these different types of films, you're going to be waiting years before you've even tried your hand at all these different types of editing. But if you can find footage to practice with, then you can try your hand at editing all of these in a matter of weeks or even months. So how do you find that footage to practice with? Well, that is exactly what we're going to be talking about in the next episode.